You know, 3 years ago, I thought I was getting punked. Seriously. I got this heavy, official-looking letter from an attorney's office, the kind that smells like old paper and expensive guilt. My great-aunt Clara had passed. She and we were close, the kind of bond forged over whispered secrets and shared fishing holes. She taught me to tie a perfect surgeon's knot and to keep my mouth shut when the loons were calling. But I never, ever expected what she left me. Not a vintage car, not some obscure family heirloom, but a deed, a clean, irrefutable deed to an entire lakefront parcel in rural Vermont. And tucked right there, smack dab in the middle of the water, like a perfectly skipped stone that had simply decided to stay, was an island. My own, personal island. I remember laughing out loud when I read the note she'd tucked inside the will. It was written on old, ivory stationery, the kind with a little embroidered border. It read, "The lake kept me sane, Ethan. Now it's your turn. Keep the peace, and for God's sake, don't let those suburban vultures touch my sandbar." I thought that last part was classic Clara, poetic hyperbole. Just a dramatic flourish. But man, I swear, she must have seen the future. It turned out to be the most prophetic warning I'd ever received. The land wasn't large. The shoreline only stretched maybe a couple of 100 feet around, and back then, the island was barely more than a glorified mound of gravel, a rugged, scrubby relic of some long-forgotten dredging project decades ago. But it was mine. And once I dove into the paperwork, that's when the real work began. I spent the better part of a year wading through county zoning laws, obscure water use rights, state environmental designations, and the meticulously organized, almost obsessive records Clara had kept. I mean, she had binders for everything. I realized exactly what I had. Decades before the modern, gated communities had even broken ground nearby, she had officially registered the island, under the name Ariel's Retreat, as an independent, titled parcel. It had its own lot number, a clean title, and was legally situated just outside the territorial limits of any potential future homeowners association. It was, quite literally, a legal island in every single sense of the word, entirely exempt from any nearby development regulations. That fact alone, I would later realize, was the trigger for everything that followed. So, I got to work. I didn't just want a sandbar, I wanted a sanctuary. I hired a few reliable guys, brought in barge loads of clean fill and proper gravel to expand the landmass a bit. I installed the expensive, state-mandated erosion control, the fancy stuff you have to beg the state for permits for, and built a reinforced dock. And then, slowly, once I knew the paperwork was absolutely solid, I built my cabin, a small, cedar-sided A-frame. Solar panels on the roof, rainwater filtration, and yes, a composting toilet system that was, frankly, more complex than my first desktop computer. I wasn't trying to build a party barge or a rental property. I was building a quiet place, a deep refuge for my wife and kids when the noise of the city got too heavy. Just peace. Books. Fishing. My dog Hank sleeping in a sunbeam on the dock, silence broken only by my kids' laughter and the haunting cry of the loons. For a long time, the world didn't seem to notice. The county drone maps never updated fast enough, which was fine by me. The whole point was the privacy. The lake itself was small, maybe 50 acres, cradled between some beautiful old timber farms on one side, and on the other, the creeping, manicured, and utterly self-important edge of modern luxury. That's where the trouble came from. A new development had sprung up, called Cypress Point Estates. It was one of those places where the houses are named after imaginary Tuscan villages, and the HOA has a budget bigger than some small towns in the state. I didn't give them a second thought. They were far enough away, and like I said, I was off-grid. Not on their plat, not on their mailing list, and absolutely not under their jurisdiction. I figured we'd coexist. Me, with my slightly rustic dock and my quiet, self-sufficient cabin. Them, with their perfect lawns and their absurdly expensive, drone-delivered organic groceries. I'd even wave at their kayakers sometimes. They'd circle a bit, take pictures, sometimes their kids would shout, "Cool house." And I'd smile. I'm not a grumpy hermit. Not usually. But then, things got weird. Right around the start of the second summer after I finished the cabin, I started noticing a pattern. The same families, the same time of day, always paddling by, always pausing, always taking photos. Then one morning, I found a glossy Cypress Point brochure floating near the shore. I picked it up, and man, there it was, an aerial view of the lake, heavily photoshopped, and my island, Ariel's retreat, was blurred out, pixelated, like some kind of visual contaminant they had to hide. The word they loved to use in their marketing was pristine. A friend of mine once joked, "Pristine is just corporate speak for sterile." I should have listened to him. I went about my business, paid my taxes, maintained the permits. I was a good steward of the lake, even replacing a few rotten planks on the public dock on the far west side because the county was ignoring it. I wasn't a nuisance. But then, the official invasion happened. I was cleaning the intake for the water pump, dripping wet, when this sleek, white pontoon boat glided toward the island. 3 people on board, dressed like they were about to host a private equity retreat. Crisp linen shirts, designer sunglasses, and, I swear, a clipboard. They docked without so much as a shout of warning, right up against my reinforced wood. I stood up, towel in hand, when the woman in the lead extended her hand. "Vivian Holloway," she chirped, her smile bright enough to power my solar array. But her eyes were absolutely flat. "Dead. President of the Cypress Point Estates Board. This is Barry, our development liaison, and Attorney Thomas." I didn't shake. I just wiped my hand on the towel and raised an eyebrow. "Such a charming spot you have here, Mr. Vance," Vivian chirped, looking around the island like she was appraising a failed Airbnb. "Truly a shame it's not available to the community." "Good thing it's not part of your community, then," I replied, trying to keep my voice level, though I could feel my pulse ticking faster in my throat. Attorney Thomas gave a weak, nervous chuckle, but Vivian didn't even blink. Her smile tightened, just a fraction. "The lake has recently been voted into the Cypress Point Stewardship Zone," she said, flatly, like that sentence was some kind of legal truth. "We've decided that this island, while quaint, is an unregulated structure on a shared resource." "Decided by who?" I asked. "The HOA board," she said. "I'm not a member. You don't need to be. When the community votes to expand, that jurisdiction applies retroactively to included parcels. It's for the environmental good, Ethan. You see, the consensus is that your personal modifications may be causing environmental degradation." I looked at her legal consultant. He was nodding, a bobblehead in a bespoke suit. "I've got every piece of paper showing this is a privately deeded island," I said, feeling the heat rise in my neck. "Filed, recorded, taxed, insured. You are not touching this place." Vivian's smile thinned into a razor edge. It was the look of someone who was suddenly realizing the cost of doing business was going up. "We truly don't want conflict. But if you won't cooperate, the board will be forced to take appropriate steps." "Appropriate steps?" I stared her down. "I'm not being relocated from my own damn land. You don't have the authority." She just gave one last, chillingly dismissive glance at the cabin, then turned away. "Enjoy the rest of your weekend, Mr. Vance. We'll be in touch." The boat pulled away, electric and silent, leaving nothing but a spreading wake and the faint, obnoxious scent of too much expensive perfume. I stood there, watching them shrink into the distance, and felt that cold, distant hum in my gut, the warning bell that goes off right before a disaster. That sound had never been wrong before. The Monday after their little boat invasion, I drove back to the county seat. I knew that when people in white linen start talking about facilitating transitions, it usually ends with you getting screwed and maybe handed a decorative fruit basket. I pulled up everything I could find on Cypress Point's expansion votes, their land use petitions, their so-called stewardship zone. What I found was that they had, indeed, filed a formal petition with the zoning board to reclassify the lake as a community-managed ecosystem. Stupid, but not illegal. What was deeply concerning was that they were meticulously framing the issue to the County Environmental Review Council not as an HOA land grab, but as an ecological threat. Apparently, the lake was at risk from improper shoreline fortifications and unregulated septic activity. If you squinted, that sounded exactly like they were describing my island. My completely permitted island. I found the submission packet. It included drone shots of Ariel's retreat with bright red circles around my permitted dock and my permitted solar array. One slide, which felt like a slap in the face, was titled, "Unregulated Private Development Threatens Long-Term Health and Public Access." Unregulated. I'd spent months navigating the bureaucracy to make sure every single dock plank, every solar panel, Every component of that composting toilet was permitted, filed, stamped, and notarized. My name was in that registry more times than the mayor's. I scanned the whole toxic mess and emailed it all to my attorney, Dahlia. She's a bulldog, and I mean that as the highest compliment, with a penchant for chewing gum like she's getting paid for it. She called back an hour later, snapping her gum. "Well, Ethan," she said, "it looks like someone is laying the groundwork to steal your island with a smile. They don't have to technically reclassify the land. They just need enough procedural noise to stall or restrict your access. If they get it designated a sensitive ecological zone, you will be buried in inspections, access limits, maybe even demolition orders. They'll never say it's about your cabin. They'll just slowly suffocate it to death." I sat in the parking lot, staring at the gray sky, feeling the weight of the state bureaucracy settling over me. This wasn't an argument about property lines anymore. This was a paper war, a siege by bureaucracy. The next week, the signs started going up. Huge, glossy, professional banners, nailed to trees along the public walking trails. Lake Serenity, reclaiming access for all. Underneath was the Cypress Point Estates logo and a URL linking to a website titled SaveTheLakeSerenity.org. The homepage had slow-motion stock footage of birds. Then it cut to a video of Vivian Holloway herself, standing by the water's edge, arms folded, eyes full of practiced concern. "We love this lake," she said to the camera, her voice perfectly modulated. "But its serenity and sustainability are under threat. An unregulated island has disrupted the natural balance. It's time we stood together to preserve our shared resource for our children and our future." I honestly couldn't believe it. She was running a full-blown PR campaign against me. A few days later, the sound of hammering started across the water, right opposite the island. At first, it was just clearing brush, but soon a full team rolled in: surveyors, piling crews, contractors with HOA badges on their tool belts. They were building a public pier, not a modest dock, but a massive structure with blueprints for lighting, seating, even a dedicated kayak rental kiosk. I sent a formal cease and desist, pointing out the land was still partially zoned as open conservation, requiring state-level approval for permanent structures. No response, just more trucks, more noise. Then came the surveillance. The patrol boat, bright white, sleek, electric motor, with Cypress Lake Watch stenciled on the side. It cruised around slowly, every few days, always taking wide, deliberate circles around Ariel's retreat. A man with a clipboard, a woman with binoculars. They never came ashore, not yet. But they watched. They took notes. They took photos. That's when I added cameras to my dock and motion sensors to the perimeter path. Just because I didn't want to play their game didn't mean I had to let them play it alone. One evening, while running a cable, I spotted a woman on the new pier, filming. Not the lake, not the sunset, but me. I raised my hand and gave her a polite wave. She responded by flipping me off and kept recording. The hostility was becoming personal. The next morning, I went back to the county records office. I'd made friends with the clerk, Marcus, and asked him if there were any permit requests tied to the lake that I might have missed. He chuckled, stirring his coffee. "You got to see this, Vance." What he pulled up was a complex development proposal filed not under the HOA, but under a shell corporation called Cascade Delta Holdings LLC. The proposal described a multi-phase lakeside rejuvenation initiative, including a wellness retreat, floating lodges, a private beach, and dead center on the renderings, a private luxury villa on my island. The proposal had been submitted as part of a long-term public-private partnership. He showed me a series of emails between Cascade Delta and the Cypress Point Advisory Board, including one directly from Vivian Holloway's HOA email, marked, "Pending successful jurisdictional resolution and removal of unregulated construction. Phase 2 can commence as early as Q2 next year." I printed every single page, walked outside, and sat in my truck for a long minute. The chill I felt was profound. They weren't just trying to take the island. They were already planning the party to celebrate my eviction. They had monetized my ruin. By the third week of this slow-burning nightmare, I was sleeping with one eye open. The tension was suffocating. One Saturday morning, the patrol boat tried to tie up to my dock. Two men in bright yellow polo shirts and mirrored sunglasses, clipboard in hand, announcing a routine inspection. "Afternoon," one said, stepping onto the dock. "Back on the boat," I said. This is private property. We're conducting a routine inspection. Unsafe shoreline conditions. Cool story, I said, and walked straight over to the bow line. Before either of them could react, I untied it and gave the boat a hard shove. The one on the dock took a step toward me. Sir, if you touch me. I cut him off. You're trespassing. You don't have a warrant. You're not law enforcement. You've got 10 seconds to get your knockoff Ray-Bans off my dock before you learn what a water rescue hold feels like in reverse. I grabbed the heavy, decorative, or mounted to the side of the cabin. It was solid oak. That did it. He backed off, muttering something about non-compliance as he hopped back onto the drifting boat. They didn't come back that day, but the message was clear: escalation. The next day, they truly escalated. I returned to the island and found the cabin door cracked open. 2 men were inside, wearing blank Navy tactical uniforms, rifling through my cabinets. Sir, one said, without even turning around, we're conducting an inspection under HOA directive. You'll need to vacate the premises. I will, I said, as soon as you show me a warrant. Neither responded. I took a step forward. I'm not going to ask twice. You're 5 steps into felony territory right now. He took a step toward me. Are you threatening me? I didn't get the chance to answer because then I heard it. Tires on gravel, boots on the dock, and a deep, calm voice. Yo, Vance. Everything okay here? It was Mac, my old college roommate, former Army Ranger, current wilderness survival instructor. He walked into the cabin, took one look at the 2 officers, and froze. Then his eyes narrowed. These guys real? I was just asking them that. Mac stepped forward, casually, but with a tension you could feel across the room. Where's your badge, buddy? The guy snapped. Official business. We don't have to explain ourselves to you. Mac stared at him, then moved lightning fast, grabbed the man's fake badge, yanked it clean off, and punched him square in the face. The guy crumpled like a cheap folding chair. The second man bolted out the door, splashed into the lake, scrambled onto their boat, and took off. I called the real sheriff immediately. The guy on the floor was cuffed and taken in. Both were private security contractors hired by Cypress Point Estates HOA. No authority, just expensive, organized intimidation. The message was clear. They had crossed the line into violence. That night, Mac and I sat on the dock, drinking whiskey. You're not going to let them win, are you? He asked. Not a chance, I said. The news article dropped on a Tuesday morning. HOA security caught trespassing on private island. Owner demands criminal charges. Then, the hammer dropped. The HOA hit me with a formal lawsuit, claiming my island was an unauthorized structure on federal navigable waters, subject to removal. They were trying to bankrupt me into submission. Dahlia went to war. We filed counterclaims for malicious prosecution, property interference, and harassment. Then came the hearing. Vivian showed up with a full legal entourage, tailored blazer, pearl necklace, and that same dead smile. They presented aerial photos and claimed my solar array threatened migratory bird patterns. It was theater. Dahlia responded by dropping a binder the size of a phone book onto the desk. Inside, every deed, every permit, every single piece of evidence proving my island was legal and sustainable. But the real nuclear device came when Dahlia introduced the emails from the public records request. Correspondence between the HOA and Cascade Delta Holdings. The email from Vivian's account. Pending successful legal resolution of the island encroachment issue, we can proceed with Phase 2 construction. Attached, updated render with villa foundation and boat lift. And then, the final blow, the internal memo from the developer. HOA board member Holloway has confirmed removal of current occupant is progressing as planned. The room went absolutely silent. The board members in the back looked sick. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Holloway, were you acting on behalf of the Homeowners Association or your personal business interests when these communications occurred? She didn't answer. The silence was deafening. The judge ordered an immediate preliminary injunction, freezing all construction and enforcement actions, and referred the matter to the county prosecutor for potential criminal investigation. I knew the civil fight was over. The criminal one was just beginning. Things went quiet for a week, and then they hit the infrastructure. I found the main solar conduit on my roof had been cleanly sliced with bolt cutters. Then I found the GPS beacon, registered to Northern Apex Risk Solutions, a security firm partially owned by Arthur Holloway, Vivian's husband. This wasn't a rogue HOA. This was a meticulously planned, family-run siege. I sent the evidence to Dahlia. That night, I slept on the island, fully awake, crowbar beside the bed. At 3:14 a.m., the alarm went off. I bolted outside. Someone had set fire to the little wooden footbridge connecting the dock to the cabin path. Flames were chewing through the planks. I managed to douse it, but the trail cam was smashed. They left a burned scrap of laminated paper with the HOA logo on it. They wanted me to be afraid. Instead, I became purely, ice-cold furious. The final, deciding piece of evidence came from a 30-second clip on a town council live stream. Vivian, smooth as silk, advocating for a public wellness site on the island. The exact location of the villa from the Cascade Delta proposal. She had lied under oath. Dahlia filed an emergency motion. We walked into the courtroom with our witnesses. The former HOA treasurer testified that Vivian used community funds for private security. Nate, the IT guy, testified that HOA email accounts were used to coordinate surveillance, and that Arthur Holloway's tattoo matched a man seen on my trail cam footage during the fire. Then Dahlia showed the court the Cascade Delta investor deck, listing Vivian Holloway as community executive liaison. The room went quiet. The judge froze the HOA's accounts and referred the case to the district attorney. It took 3 months for everything to unravel. The forensic audit found fraud and misallocated funds everywhere. Arthur tried to offload his company, but the paper trail was too short. The county prosecutor brought down charges for fraud, unlawful surveillance, false representation of authority, and conspiracy to commit arson. I sat in the back row when the verdict came in. Vivian in her tailored suit, Arthur having been arrested 2 nights prior trying to board a flight out of state. The sentence, 12 years each, with no parole for the first 5. They were let out of the room in cuffs. I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I just finally, truly, exhaled. The tension that had held me for 2 years simply dissipated. Cypress Point Estates HOA was officially dissolved by court order 2 weeks later. The pier was torn down. The patrol boat disappeared. My island stood. I rebuilt the dock using composite materials that wouldn't catch fire. I rewired the solar, added backup batteries, and installed a military-grade camera system with a second power source buried under the sand. And then I put up a sign. A simple, handmade cedar plank, stained and bolted to a steel post just off the dock, facing the water. It reads, "Private property. Sovereign parcel ownership is not subject to vote." The local paper ran one last story. Island owner prevails. HOA dissolved after corruption scandal. There was a picture of me and my kids fishing off the dock. One headline someone shared simply read, "He won." The lesson here isn't just about an island. It's about how easily people with power confuse community management with absolute control, and how greed, mixed with HOA authority, becomes a toxic, dangerous blend. They didn't want my land for the community. They wanted it for a profit, and they used the language of pristine and preservation to cover up a felony. You have to know your papers, know your permits, and when someone tells you to move from your own spot, you have to be ready to fight the paper war, and maybe even the physical one. So, here's my question for you. Have you ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA or a bureaucratic bully who tried to tell you what you could or couldn't do on your own property? Did you fight back, or did you just let it go? Tell me your story in the comments below. Let's talk about where the line is between community rules and corporate overreach. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see the footage from the dock cameras I finally got working.